Have you ever had a really good scare? Maybe it was in the dark. Maybe it was when you were younger. But then the lights got turned on or you got a little bit older and you looked back on that thing that frightened you and you went, wonder why I was afraid of that. See, we get over some of those fears because we think that we can see more, or we think that we have known more, that that thing no longer frightens us. But not all fears are supposed to be fears that we get over. There are some fears that bring a healthy respect to our lives. I think about in the Star Wars movies when Yoda is training Luke Skywalker and tells Luke, at some point you're going to have to face Darth Vader. And Luke's attitude is really like, well, let me just go after him right now. In fact, he tells Yoda, he says, I'm not afraid. And Yoda squints his eyes and says, oh, you will be. What did Yoda know? He said, Luke, you can't just walk in to face Darth Vader just very flippantly and take it very lightly and casually. He'll crush you. He has such power that you need to have a healthy fear, a healthy respect of what he can do. You need to train a little bit more and be ready for him before you're able to face him. We need to have a holy fear. Now, why am I talking about fear as we start an Advent series as we approach Christmas? Well, I want you to think about something with me. Right now, when we celebrate Christmas, most of the time we put a word in front of Christmas. We say, Merry Christmas. Or people will say, this is a joyous time of year. It's a time of celebration and gift giving. But when we look back on the arrival of Jesus, his birth at Bethlehem, his first advent on earth, we don't see words like that. In fact, there are more angels that show up surrounding any event in the Bible than there are around this event of the birth of Jesus. 4 different times, angels show up with messages to people, and all 4 angelic visits around this time all contain the exact same 4 words. Do not be afraid. Interesting. This time that we look back on now and we celebrate with joy, these people at this time, when the message came to them, the message had to be counteracted with an angel saying, hold on, do not be afraid. Why is that? Well, I think that we need to remember what's happening when Jesus comes. It's not just a little helpless baby being born in a manger in Bethlehem. It is God himself who is showing up. John writes this for us. The true light that gives light to every man was coming into the world. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. God, this bright light, is coming to earth. Now, here's what Paul then wrote to his friend Timothy. He said, God, the blessed and only ruler, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, who alone is immortal, and, here's this idea of light again, who lives in unapproachable light, whom no one has seen or can see, to him be honor and might forever. Amen. It's a scary thing when something that is unapproachable is now approaching us. So you can understand why the angels say, do not be afraid. C.S. Lewis wrote a great series of books called The Chronicles of Narnia, and in the opening book called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, he describes a time in Narnia when Narnia is held in the grip of somebody named the White Witch. And this woman billed herself as a queen, and she had such an iron grip on Narnia that it was described as being always winter, but never Christmas. Always cold and frozen and gray, but never getting to that point of celebration. And so the 4 Pevensey children have arrived in Narnia at the same time that Aslan is on the move. Aslan is a picture of Jesus. Aslan is a lion. Jesus in the Bible is referred to as the Lion of Judah. And these 4 children are having a meal in the home of Mr. and Mrs. Beaver. And let me pick up the story for you. "It's no good, son of Adam," said Mr. Beaver. "No good your trying of all people. But now that Aslan is on the move." "Oh, yes, tell us about Aslan," said several voices at once. For once again, that strange feeling, like the first signs of spring, like good news had come over them. "Who is Aslan?" asked Susan. "Aslan?" said Mr. Beaver. "Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood. But not often here, you understand. Never in my time or my father's time. But the word has reached us that he has come back. He is in Narnia at this moment. He'll settle the White Queen all right. It is he, not you, that will save Mr. Tumnus." "She won't turn him into stone too," said Edmund. "Lord love you, son of Adam. What a simple thing to say," answered Mr. Beaver with a great laugh. "Turn him into stone? If she can stand on her 2 feet and look him in the face, it'll be the most she can do, and more than I expect of her. No, he'll put all to rights, as it says in an old rhyme in these parts. Wrong will be right when Aslan comes in sight. At the sound of his roar, sorrows will be no more. When he bares his teeth, winter meets its death. And when he shakes his mane, we shall have spring again. You'll understand when you see him." "But shall we see him?" asked Susan. "Why, daughter of Eve, that's what I brought you here for. I'm to lead you where you shall meet him," said Mr. Beaver. Is he a man?" asked Lucy. "Aslan a man?" said Mr. Beaver sternly. "Certainly not. I tell you, he is the king of the wood, and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion." "Oh," said Susan, "I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion." "That you will, dearie, and make no mistake," said Mrs. Beaver. "If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or just silly." "Then he isn't safe?" said Lucy. "Safe?" said Mr. Beaver. "Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you." I love that phrase. Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. I also like the reminder in this story where he says, it's Aslan who's going to set things right, not you. You're not the one that's able to do that. You see, when God is showing up here, we have to remember that God is holy. He is all holy. No sin can be in his presence. But God is also love, and he wants sinners to be able to come to him. So think about that. God is holy on one side, and no sin can approach him. And yet God is love, and he wants sinners to approach him. When we realize that we can't get there, I can't do anything about that, I can't make it possible for me to be there, that creates more fear in me. But here is the miracle about the arrival of Jesus, about the advent of Jesus, is that God does it for himself. All the way back in the beginning of the Bible, when Adam and Eve sin, they realize as they look down that they're naked, they're exposed. They try to take care of it themselves in a really short-sighted way. They pull off leaves off of a vine, off of a tree, and they try to sew them together to make clothing for themselves. Now, think about that. What happens after you detach them from the vine? They're already dying. Eventually, they're going to crumble. It's not going to be something that will last. But God comes, and he sacrifices an animal and uses that skin to make clothing for Adam and Eve. God takes it on himself to clothe their nakedness that made them want to run away from God, their nakedness that made them fearful at his approach. He said, let me clothe you so that you can approach me. Listen to how Isaiah describes it. In chapter 59, he says, "Now listen, surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save, nor his ear too dull to hear." Okay, God can do it. But your iniquities, speaking of us humans, your iniquities have separated you from your God. Your sin have hidden his face from you. Okay? So it's our sin that's brought this bad shape that we're in. He says, so justice is far from us. Righteousness does not reach us. We look for light. Remember when Jesus comes, he comes as the light in the world. We're looking for it, but all is darkness. For brightness, but we walk in deep shadow. Like the blind, we grope along the wall, feeling our way like men without eyes. At midday, we stumble as if it were twilight. Among the strong, we're like the dead. Then he goes on to say this. So justice is driven back, righteousness stands at a distance, truth has stumbled in the streets, honesty cannot enter, truth is nowhere to be found, and whoever shuns evil becomes a prey. That's not really a good situation. And God knew it. Isaiah goes on, the Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. He saw that there was no one. He was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So his own arm worked salvation for him, and his own righteousness sustained him. Now listen to what is promised when Jesus comes. The angel speaking to Joseph says this. She, speaking about Mary, will give birth to a son, and you are to give him the name Jesus because he will save his people. He's the one who's going to do it. He will save his people from their sins. So we don't want to tame this first Advent. We don't want to look back on it and say, oh yeah, it should be merry and joyful and a time of celebration. No, it was a time of fear because of the approach of God. And people were thinking that they had to do something to get ready and realizing how inadequate they were for his arrival. Now, the Bible has for us two primary words that get used for fear. In the Old Testament Hebrew, there's a word yare. In the New Testament Greek, there's a word phobeo. Now, I want to look at yare first because when we're talking about this birth of Jesus and we're in reading the books in the New Testament, at that time, there was no New Testament. When people like Mary and Joseph and Zachariah and Elizabeth, and when they talk about Scripture, they're talking about the 39 books that we refer to as the Old Testament. So they understood this word yare at the time. Okay, so let's go to Psalm 112, and I want you to see what the psalmist here has to say about yare, about fear. He says this, praise the Lord. Blessed is the man who fears the Lord. There's that yare word. Who finds great delight in his commands. Interesting that he says the one who is blessed, the man or the woman who is blessed, has both, not either or, has both fear of God and great delight in his commands. See, both the word yare and phobeo really have these two different paths that you can take. On the one side, yare and phobeo can both be something that is absolutely positively to be avoided. It is so dreadful, it is so fearful, you want to have nothing to do with it. On the other side, yare and phobeo both mean something that there is a holy fear, there is an awesome reverence for it, and that is exhibited by our obedience to it. You see, on one side, we want to run away from it. On the other side, with obedience, we're clinging to it. And so here's what the psalmist says, is the one who is blessed is the one who fears the Lord, has a holy reverential respect for him, and at the same time, a great delight in obeying him and following his commands. Now, he goes on to describe this blessed man or woman this way. He will have no fear of bad news. His heart is steadfast, trusting in the Lord. His heart is secure. He will have no fear. Now, notice this as well. When we're looking at yare, we're saying on one side that there could be things that are temporal and finite, and on the other side, there are things that are eternal and infinite. And so if we have a holy respect, a holy fear for those things that are eternal and infinite, then we lose our fear over the things that are merely temporal, the things that are finite. Jesus gave us the same thought in Luke's gospel, Luke chapter 12. He says this, I tell you, my friends, do not be afraid of those who kill the body and after that can do no more. He's talking about the temporal things there. But I will show you whom you should fear. Fear him who, after your body has been killed, has the authority to throw you into hell. Yes, I tell you, fear him. Have a holy respect for the one who is eternal, not a fear over things that are just merely temporal, temporary, and finite. Now, the very first time that these four words, do not be afraid, show up, and in the Greek, it's actually just two words, phobeo me. The first time that it shows up is in Luke chapter 1, when a man named Zechariah, who is a priest, is in the holy place of the temple. He's offering incense, and an angel shows up and says, phobeo me, do not be afraid, Zechariah. Now, why would Zechariah be afraid? Why would he be fearful at the approach of God? Well, we can go back and look at verse number 5 of Luke chapter 1. It tells us that Herod is the king at this time. Herod is not a nice man, and that is a massive understatement. He was political. He was conniving. He would sell his own grandmother to get his way. This is a guy that just in a few years from now has absolutely no qualms whatsoever about killing all of the male babies around Bethlehem in his attempt to try to kill the infant Jesus. Okay? He never even gave it a second thought. This is not a good guy. And so during this very political environment, everybody is kind of calculating which side do they need to be with. Do they need to align themselves with this group, this group, this group, this group? Where do they need to be so that they can have the best advantages going forward? Zechariah, I think, is also fearful because he's older. He's really kind of past the time in life when he could father children, and he has no offspring. Now, it tells us here that in verse number 5 again, that Zechariah and his wife Elizabeth both can trace their family lineage all the way back to Aaron. Now, who's Aaron? The very first high priest. So now there's lots of Levites that can serve around the temple and do different activities, but only the people that are in that high priestly line of Aaron actually get to go all the way into the temple, not only to the holy place, but into the Holy of Holies. And here is Zechariah saying, I'm a part of this elite, very exclusive family line, and my family line is going to end with me and Elizabeth because we don't have any children. I have nothing to pass along. That would make him fearful. But then I think the third reason why he's fearful is he says in verse number 18 that Elizabeth is not only barren, but he says she is well along in years. In other words, her biological clock has stopped ticking. It's just not possible for her to get pregnant anymore. Now, in this culture, in this time, if a woman was barren, there was a lot of whispering going on because either this woman or possibly her parents had sinned. There was sin involved, and it was being shown by the fact that she was barren. She was unable to have a child. And so when the angel shows up, you can understand why the first thing that he has to say to Zechariah is, do not be afraid. Zechariah says, I live in the wrong culture, the wrong environment right now with King Herod and all of the political parties and wrangling that's going on. I am about to pass away, and my family line is going to die off with me. My wife, she may have sinned somehow, and maybe I haven't been able to see it. She hasn't been able to see it, but somewhere there's some sin that's unresolved, that's not been taken care of, and that's why she's barren. And so in that environment, when he's saying, I don't know how to make things right, and now God is approaching, you can understand why he's fearful about God's approach. But here's what I want you to get. These two words that are translated in the four words, do not be afraid, these two words, phobeo me, always amount to an invitation. What are you going to put your fear and your respect toward? Are you going to trust what you can do or what God has done? Are you going to trust and look to the things that are temporal and finite, things that are happening right now? Or are you going to look to the things that are infinite and eternal, things that will last forever? Phobeo me, Zechariah. You have a choice to make. And he tells him right here, do not be afraid, Zechariah. Your prayer has been heard. See, it really comes down to this. Zechariah, are you going to trust what God has already done? Or are you going to trust what you think that you might have to do? And maybe you're fearful because you realize, I have to do it, but I don't think that I can do it. Where are you going to put your trust? Your prayer has been heard. Now, it doesn't matter the environment. It doesn't matter what your family line is. And it really has nothing to do about Elizabeth's sin. In fact, years from now, in John's gospel, Jesus is going to walk by a blind man, and his disciples are going to ask him, hey, Jesus, who sinned, this guy or his parents, that he's blind? And Jesus said this, it's not this man who sinned, and it's not his parents who sinned. This blindness, this thing has happened so that God will be glorified. And really, the angel is saying the same thing when he says your prayer has been heard. He says, Zechariah, it's not about you falling short, and it's not about Zechariah's sin. This thing has happened so that God can be glorified. Listen to what Peter reminds us in 2 Peter chapter 3. The Lord does not delay and is not tardy or slow about what he promises. And in 1 Corinthians, Paul writes this, God is faithful. And that word means reliable, trustworthy, and therefore ever true to his promise. And he can be depended on. Now, sadly, Zechariah at first chose the negative phobeo. He chose to say, okay, but how's this going to happen? Because we're too old. It's just simply not biologically possible for us to get pregnant at this time. And the angel pronounced over Zechariah that he wouldn't be able to speak until the day that his son, John, would be born. And sure enough, Elizabeth conceived, a male child was born. Everybody was asking Zechariah, what are you going to name him? And he wrote down, his name shall be John, and he holds it up. And as soon as he said that, his tongue was loosed. And listen to what Luke records for us in chapter 1 of Luke, verse 67. His father Zechariah was filled with the Holy Spirit and prophesied. Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and has redeemed his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him, check this out, without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. Mr. Beaver said it to Peter. Hey, Peter, it's not what you can do, it's what Aslan can do. God himself said that in Isaiah. He looked around and said, there's nobody else who can do this, so I'm going to do it myself. And do you notice that emphasis in this praise that Zechariah gives? Everything, he's putting it back on God. He has come. He has redeemed. He has raised up. He's the one who said this. He's the one who promised this. He's the one who made a covenant. He swore this, and he is the one who is rescuing us. And then when he says he is enabling us to serve him without fear, he uses a different word here. It's the word aphobos. A phobos. That word a at the beginning means without, and phobos means this crippling fear, this fear that keeps us from doing what we're supposed to do. That was Zechariah. When he says to him, Zechariah, your prayer has been heard, he was saying, Zechariah, you prayed this, but then you were crippled by your fear. You stopped praying, you stopped believing, you stopped trying to get pregnant. You were crippled by your fear because you were fearing the wrong thing. So I wonder, friend, as we look at this story, have you put yourself in that category that Zechariah did? Well, I must be unworthy of God's blessing. I must have messed up somewhere. Well, and if it wasn't me, maybe it was my parents. Or maybe, boy, this environment that I live in right now, it's kind of like Herod. It's so political. It's so conniving. It's so evil. I live in this culture right now. Why would God want to come and bless somebody that lives in these surroundings that I'm in right now? Have you put yourself in that category? If you've put yourself there, then maybe like Zechariah, that fear has crippled you and you've stopped believing. You've stopped trusting. You've stopped trying because you're like, hey, look at, like it said about Zechariah, the biological clock has been ticking and it stopped. That's it. Game over. You've taken your eyes off of the eternal one and you've put it on your temporary surroundings. But listen what the prophet Habakkuk said. The time is coming, and what I show you will come true. It may seem slow in coming, but wait for it. It will certainly take place, and it will not be delayed. Wait for it. It is coming. Now, that word wait doesn't mean like off taking a nap. The word wait means to wait in ambush. Like you've put out a net and you're just waiting for the thing that you're hunting for to get in your net so that you can trip it and you can spring, you can get it. Listen to what Psalm 33 says. We wait in hope for the Lord because he is our help. He's the one who's going to do it. Friends, you're going to be fearful and you're going to be crippled by your fear if you think that you have to do it. You can't do it. Let me take you back again to what the psalmist said in Psalm 112. When you have this holy fear of God and you delight in what he has said and you're ready to obey what he has said, then you will have no fear of bad news. Your heart will be steadfast, trusting in the Lord. Your heart will be secure, and you will have no fear. Friends, look that fear right between the eyes and say, is this fear because I think I have to do something? Is this a fear because I'm looking at the temporal, I'm looking at the finite, I'm looking at just what's happening right now? Because if you look up at God and say, look what he has said, look what he has done, look what he has promised, look what he will do, then these other things, you're going to have no fear of bad news. And that is the good news of the advent of Jesus. Lord, I pray for my friends that may be crippled by fear. Will you help them take their eyes off the temporal and put their eyes on the eternal? Let them stop thinking about what they have to do and let them look at and believe and trust what you have already done, what you have already promised in your word, what your covenant to them has already been. And may they choose not to be crippled by their fears, but to live in reverential awe and holy obedience, steadfast obedience to you. And may those temporal fears fall away as they live in a holy fear and awesome reverence of the great God who wants us to be able to approach. Thank you for doing that. God bless you, friends. I'd love to be able to dialogue with you. Leave some comments below. Reach out to me. I promise that I will get back to you. I love you, and I pray God's blessing on you as you live with no fear.